So I'm very excited today to sit here with Dr. Clive Boddy, world-renowned researcher within the field of organizational psychopathy within the Anglia Ruskin University in Great Britain. You are so warmly welcome, Dr. Clive Boddy.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's good to be here.
In our pre-talk that we had a couple of weeks ago, I was astonished with the depth of your research and also your very human take on everyday life and how we interact with these behaviors on a regular basis. And today we're going to dive into a little bit of your knowledge and experience over the past 20 years. But before, please, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and who you are and what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, on a daily basis, I'm an academic these days, so I mainly focus on research into various aspects of leadership, mainly dark or toxic or destructive leadership in the form of psychopathic leadership. And to my way of thinking, it's the psychopathic leadership which is the basis, the fundamental essence of all types of dark leadership, whether you call them exploitative or narcissistic or Machiavellian or toxic. Whatever word you use, at their essence, they are primary psychopaths. So callous, unemotional, without conscience, and totally ruthless in how they deal with other people.
And in your research, you state that psychopaths are overrepresented in management and executive teams. And if that is true, how likely is it for people that are listening now and tuning into our conversation that they are actually working for a psychopath at the moment?
Well, theoretically, if we know around, say, 5 to 10 people relatively well at the place we work, then probably between 5 and 15% of us would be working closely enough with a corporate psychopath to realize there's something wrong with their personality, to realize they're ruthless and bullying and abusive. They might not identify it as psychopathy, but that at its essence is what it is. And that translates, that 5 to 15% translates into about 30 or 40% of people who will work alongside a psychopathic person during their career. An important caveat to that is that some segments of the workplace will come across them more than others. So, for example, HR directors are likely to come across psychopathic people because they have to deal with the after effects. So they have to deal with sexual harassment, bullying, abuse, abuse of workplace resources, fraud, embezzlement, all that kind of thing. And therefore, we estimate around 70% of HR directors will have dealt with a psychopath by the end of their careers. And the other group which come across them are surprisingly auditors. And there's a study from Denmark that showed that 69% of auditors think they've come across a corporate psychopath during the course of their work life, usually in association with a fraud or attempted fraud. So it's the people who deal with bad behavior who will come across them more often. The other influence on whether you come across them or not is probably the socio-economic sector that you work in. So psychopaths are after money, power, and control, and prestige to some extent. So they tend to gravitate, in theory anyway, to those occupations which can offer those elements. So high-paid, high-power occupations. So there's probably more of them in places like corporate and investment banking than there are in the more lower paid and caring professions such as nursing or healthcare or beauticians or people who look after other people in some way tend to be low paid, which isn't attractive to psychopaths. And they also tend to care for other people, which, of course, psychopaths don't.
Yeah, true. And I can only, as the past 10, 15 years of my career, previous to what I do today, I was a HR director or HR manager. And you don't have to do your full career in order to come across clear signs of the organizational psychopathic behaviors. As you state, I have encountered them on several occasions, and they are equally disturbing and frightening and shocking each time. And I know that I'm using quite strong words, but in the situations that you mention, the effect in people, like you say, in the aftermath of these behaviors, have a huge impact on the victims or the ones who have been working very closely with these types of personalities or behaviors.
Yeah, very
so
much
you,
so.
yeah.
Just to interrupt that. Yeah, I mean, once we interviewed HR directors who thought they'd worked with these people, and even 20 years after the event, they were still emotional and visibly moved by their experience, which had a long-lasting, effective impact on their personality. You know, that they were bothered about it and upset about it even many years afterwards. So, and some other people who weren't HR directors, it severely interrupted their career. I mean, one woman just stopped working for several years while she had psychotherapy sessions to help her get over the trauma of what she'd experienced.
Yeah, it's horrific, and sorry.
It can be horrific, yes.
Yeah, it can be horrific, and it's a scale, isn't it? When it comes to these behaviors,
Well, yeah, the measures that we use are continuums, obviously. So everybody falls on the continuum somewhere, but around 80% of people are very low on that continuum. So it's not a normal curve in a statistical sense, you know, not a normal bell curve. It's asymmetrical. So most people, say 80% of people, are down at the bottom of the scale, and it's only really around 20% who even score more than half, and it's only the top 1% who are categorically psychopathic. There is evidence from I can't remember the names of the researchers, and I think it was Coyd was one of them, that once you reach a certain cut-off point on a psychopathy measure, you become immensely more problematic and difficult and behaviorally abhorrent as a full-fledged psychopath, as you'd expect.
So before we continue more into the area of organizational psychopathy, how did you end up diving into this? Because you've dedicated your career to this and the past, what is it, 20 years?
It was 21 now.
Yeah, 21 now, yeah. So how did you come into becoming a world-leading researcher within this field?
Well, I started out as a market researcher, and an entrepreneurial market researcher. We formed our own company in Asia Pacific, and one of the people I worked with, who was one of the partners in the firm, had a certain amount of ruthlessness and over ambition in terms of generating personal wealth. And when I first read about psychopaths, it just reminded me of him. So I thought that maybe I'd worked with one of these people. He may not have been categorically psychopathic, but he was certainly high up there on the scale. and that's what's stimulated my interest. Yeah.
Mhm. And isn't that usually the case, though, that you have a personal experience and that you realize, oh, wow, the effect, even if it's not deeply emotional, but the effect of the experience catapult you into a field. I mean, and that's how it is for me, at least. Seen it in organizations, seen it outside of organizations as well. And like you say, even if it's not full blown uh, diagnosis level on the continuum, it's still on the upper 20% affects people in a non normal way.
Yeah, I think once you've come across one of these people, you don't. It's not something you can easily forget.
Mm.
It does have a psychological impact and a career impact.
Yeah, yeah. So if we rewind the tape a little bit and just give a fundamental understanding of what is an organizational psychopath, what are or what is organizational psychopathy?
Yeah, well, organizational psychopaths are people who don't have a conscience, they lack emotional responsiveness to other people, and that enables them to be callous and unemotional and totally egotistical and self-oriented in everything that they do. So there are many negative traits, but the problem is for the rest of us and for society and for the way we choose leaders, not only in organizations, but also in politics as well,
Mm.
is that there are two traits or two characteristics which mask all the others. So when you first meet them, they appear to be charming and apparently intelligent. So they're sociable and friendly. And they're also poised and calm and always rational. So there's no minor neuroses there that the rest of us might have. They're all
Mm.
cool, calm, and collected. So in a way, they seem like ideal leadership material because they look better than the rest of us do in interview situations or
Mm.
in situations which call for calm, collected rationality. Um, and therefore, we as a society, we confuse psychopathic leadership with transformational leadership, which is the leadership that we really need.
Yeah.
And we mistake one for the other and end up in enormous amounts of trouble because of that.
So, definitely, and you're on to something extremely interesting. Speaking also from recruiting managers and executive leaders, uh, with misunderstanding or misinterpreting that sense of lack of empathy as being having emotional intelligence and emotional control.
Yeah, I think that can happen. Yeah.
And what you're also talking about is charming and intelligent. Is I mean the charming part. It's initial, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. So when you first meet them, they look like your next best friend. They look like they're going to help you in your career. They're very positive towards you. They shape their interests so that it sounds like you've got things in common, even though you probably haven't.
Mm.
Um, and so they make themselves. They're very good at being seductive in both sexual and non-sexual ways. So you'll
Mm.
feel attracted to them in various ways. And that's where the trouble starts, because it's only when you know them or have known them for some amount of time that their ruthlessness and greed and egotistical approach and cheating personality and willingness to tell lies all the time comes
Mm.
out. And by the time you've realized what you're actually dealing with, it's often too late because you've been outmaneuvered in terms of any attempt to try and stop them doing what they're doing.
So, based on these two parameters, the charming and intellectual one, and then the calm and poised, Do you have an example of a situation that you've encountered in your research or in your interviews with countless people, that you could tell us about, where the outmaneuvering happened, or any other um, clear sign?
Well, it's a sort of amalgamation of experience of talking to people who have experienced these people. So it's a very common modus operandi that they apply. So they start out, as I said, being friendly and sociable and charming and delightful to be with. And then by the time you realize that this is just a facade, then it's too late. So the most well-known book on psychopathy is called The Mask of Sanity. So it's this idea of the mask that is really essential to the condition, because it fools everybody. It fools parole boards and doctors and anybody who's trying to assess these people. And one of my theories about them is that they're increasingly getting into leadership positions because of the fast pace of modern corporate society and the quick turnover of personnel. So we're having managers for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years who would used to spend a whole lifetime in the company. And so this turnover means it's beneficial for the psychopathic, because they do so well in an interview situation. And they're also prepared to claim qualifications that they don't really have, like an MBA from Harvard, in one example from my research, and experience they don't have, and competencies they don't have. And they claim the good work of other people as if they've done it themselves. So all these claims on their CV are tenuous to various degrees, or outright lies, or just misleading. So they look a lot better than they really are.
I received this question from, because you and I, we share a passion. You are obviously from the highly academic research perspective, and me having lived in an HR manager position and encountered several of them, but also in my current position where we train as well in these behaviors, or how to handle them and identify them. And that's why I think your perspective is so immensely interesting as well when it comes to identifying, like you're saying right now. You're so clear with the signals or red flags. And because I received a question from a person who asked me the question, like, I have worked with a person with these traits, with clear organizational psychopathic behaviors. Now, this person was fired from the company that and hired into a board or executive position in another corporation, a large company. So the person, yes, the psychopath, if we can label this person that, in this conversation, was hired into a more senior position in a much larger company, and the person that called me said, should I warn the board that hired the psychopath? Should I call? Should I warn? Should I, say, hey? Because they were so excited that they finally got this wonderful person on board.
Yeah, well, that raises a whole host of ethical issues, of course, because
yes,
and practical issues, because I've been in a similar situation myself, not with somebody who was psychopathic, but somebody who was a known bully, moving from one organization to another. So the question is, do you attempt to warn them? And I think at the end of the day, people wouldn't believe you. If you contacted their board and said, I think this person is potential psychopath, they're bullying and abusive, they make people leave the organization, they just wouldn't believe you, because they've just spent X amount of time in hiring them and giving them a large salary, so that their inbuilt psychological predisposition, I'm sure there's a word for it in psychology, but I can't remember it, is to think they're great people.
Mm.
So
So
even
there's
if you tried to warn them, I don't think you'd get anywhere.
mm. So then it's not just because my other question was as well, why do we fall for this time and time again? Because I mean, even if you have a certain amount of knowledge or you don't want the effect of them, we still fall for what you talked about, the power position, the socioeconomic standard or results that these personalities or behaviors result in. Because they do, don't they? Or they produce results.
They're very good at saying that they produce results. So they're very good at giving the image of success. But quite often, when you dig into it a bit further, there's a lot of, the right word, misstatement of actual success going on, or outright fraud. So one of the most common things that, as I said, psychopaths get involved in is thought to be fraud. And you use the case of Robert Maxwell or Bernie Madoff or the top three guys at N, Pasto, Lay, and what was the other one? Anyway. And, there's a lot of obfuscation of actual financial results. And you can do that usually for 2 or 3 years before people start to find out that the underlying economics are not there. So you can manipulate usually financial statements for a finite amount of time before the real truth becomes evident. And that's what usually happens to companies like Enron. Once they're exposed, it becomes immediately obvious.
A clear 20% of top of the continuum, maybe the top 10 or 5%, they don't stay at a company for a long time. Is that what one can read into that?
The quick turnover of personnel in general means that there's more opportunity for them to get hired because they're so good at interviews, and they present a false persona, and they present a fraudulent CV as well. So they look like ideal candidates and get themselves voted or elected or selected into senior leadership positions. So the quicker the turnover of personnel, the more that takes place, because if you're in a company where everybody has worked together for 20 or odd years or 30 years, you know what people are really like by the end of that time. So if someone went for a promotion and you know it was going to be disastrous because of their abhorrent personality, then you would try to stop it. But when you don't know people and they look charming and friendly, then all you have to go on is the false impression that they've given you and their false, or partially or largely false CV. And you make the choice based on the wrong assumptions.
So what is I'm thinking for recruiters and people that are recruiting executive level positions or any position really, how can you tell?
Well, we've got to be more thorough in our background checks. So not only ask for a reference from those above them, which is what normally happens, but get a reference from those below them as well, because those below them are much more likely to have an accurate picture of their real personality. Also check the qualifications that they claim to have. So in one, I told you the example of a fake MBA from Harvard, which turned out to be totally fraudulent. So they'll claim qualifications they don't really have and competencies they don't really have as well. So we have to be a lot more thorough in our background checks and our checks of qualifications and our checks of the people they worked with. So the key question would be, would you work with this person again?
Yeah.
And if no, would you work with them again for twice the money? And if no, would you work with them again for any amount of money? And quite often people say no all the way through. I just reread one of my papers on this, and that's exactly what happened with one person. So no amount of money would entice people to go back into that work relationship and work environment again.
Yeah. So speaking of that person who is either a direct or indirect victim of this of the organizational psychopaths, is there a specific type of person that usually falls into that category of being the victim of these psychopathic behaviors?
Well, psychopaths are very good at choosing vulnerable people. So it depends on what type of abusive behavior they're going to unleash on you. So if they thought you were romantically vulnerable, then they might start to harass you sexually, for example, and coerce you into that sort of relationship, say with the promise of promotions or the promise of favoritism or whatever. So it would depend on their evaluation of your weaknesses. But we all suffer from their behavior because they don't act in line with organizational aims and objectives. So the whole company starts to steer off course towards an end which is beneficial to the psychopath rather than beneficial to the organization itself. And that means everyone's career starts to suffer in a way that is very hard to see if you're not personally involved with the psychopathic manager. So if you work closely with them, you'll get an idea that they are the cause of organizational dysfunction and organizational misdirection. But if you're in another department, all you'll know is that the company's going in a weird way, and you won't know why, or it's going in a way that isn't in its own long-term interests, and you won't know why that's happening.
So let's for a minute talk about codependency connected to the psychopathic behaviors. What is your take on that in organizations?
Well, codependency is something I know almost nothing about, I'm afraid. So I don't think I'm qualified to comment on that element.
Okay, and the reason for my question is because I've seen sometimes in organizations where, for example, the CEO of a company defends and stands up for this charming, intellectual, like you said, person who has a tendency to manipulate and charm in a way. So the CEO is wrapped around the little finger of the psychopath, and whilst the rest of the organization or close co-workers or whatever to the psychopathic behaviors, they see them. Is that something that's common or in your research?
They very quickly realize who they need to impress in an organization and who doesn't matter. And the people who don't matter will very soon find out what this person is really like. The people above them tend to never find out what they're really like, because there's a constant stream of upward impression management activities where they tell them how great they are, and they tell them what a great job they're doing in the organization for their bosses. And so the bosses tend to think of them as star employees.
Yeah.
And we've seen this time and again in the research we've done, whereas everyone else thinks of them as a devil in a suit sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a huge discrepancy between their evaluation at the top and the evaluation of those underneath them, which is why I mentioned when you're getting references, for these people, find out the opinions of those who worked for them or underneath them, as well as those above them. And if there's a huge difference, that's a big red flag.
Thank you, and we'll talk a little bit more about red flags in a minute as well. Going through your research and reading a little bit, you have also you talk about the politics a lot, about psychopathy within the political system as well, and I found a very interesting connection to the financial crisis. And so, with psychopathic personalities, could have made or played a role in the global financial crisis.
Well, yeah, that was a theory of mine which stemmed from the idea that they're interested in money, power, and control, and therefore they congregate in financial sectors and corporate banking, and therefore they must have played a big role in the global financial crisis of 2008. And so this, when that theory was published in 2011, it became the most downloaded and discussed on the media of any paper from the Journal of Business Ethics at the time, or even since then. And it was discussed by financial commentators on the Bloomberg website. And the consensus of opinion on there was that I was merely stating the obvious, and that everybody knows that the financial sector is full of ruthless, greedy, psychopathic type people, and therefore I wasn't really telling a new story at all. On the academics, on the other hand, were a bit more flabbergasted by the whole thing, and they thought it was a bit unbelievable. But since then, the idea of the financial psychopath has entered the common language, as you know, the common lexicon. And I've just done some recent research, which I reported on in my last talk at the Cambridge Festival. And that shows that, it's not yet published, but that shows that the psychopathic would be willing to create another global financial crisis in return for a large monetary bonus for themselves. So not only would they be willing to do that, but even if we knew it was them at an individual named level who caused the crisis, they would still be willing to do it. So in other words, they put, and hardly anyone who was non-psychopath is willing to do that, tiny amount. Whereas the majority of psychopaths were perfectly willing to do that. So they're willing to exploit and financially cripple everyone else in the world just so that they can get rich in the process, which underscores the need to screen them out of certain professions, like maybe corporate banking. And a sort of side story to that is when my 2011 paper came out about the corporate psychopaths theory of the global financial crisis, a financial reporter discussed it with one of his friends in British corporate banking, and the friend said to him, he was called Basham, we used the psychopathy measure to recruit people into our bank. So if they were successful at doing that, then the number of psychopaths in corporate banking might be quite a lot higher than the 4 to 10% that is estimated.
Yeah. Just to get results and
well, they thought they'd be highly ruthless and competitive against their competitors, but they're just as likely to be internally ruthless as they are to be externally ruthless. So it's not a good long-term plan. I don't
no. Very true. And something that struck me in our pre-talk was that you mentioned the thought that certain psychopathic behaviors is a good leadership trait, and that when you look at unless I misunderstood, but like when you look at psychopaths or psychopathic behaviors compared to what a truly good leader is, it's not the truth.
Oh yeah, we have a misunderstanding of what true leadership entails. So, as a society, we tend to prefer an extroverted leader. We tend to prefer someone who's charismatic
Yeah.
and very vocal. And what in academic research, what is quite clear is the very best leaders, the very most effective leaders, are usually relatively quiet, introverted, humble, self-effacing people who you wouldn't even notice in a room, rather than these self-aggrandizing megalomaniacs that you see running corporations these days. So it's almost counterintuitive. It's the humble, and so their characteristics are two main characteristics. One is humility, and the other one is a determination to succeed. So conscientiousness, I suppose, is another word for that. Whereas the psychopathic are not conscientious at all, except in pursuit of their own self-aggrandizement.
And also the traits that you're talking or speaking about from an academic standpoint, they usually take a little bit longer when you tie them to a time perspective. Is that true? Or that's my reflection, at least.
Oh well, yeah. They only become evident over time. So as you get to know the people better, and as you see what they're actually doing.
Yeah. So humility and determination to succeed, that might take a little longer to show the results because you work.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry, I thought you were talking about psychopathic leaders. No, very much so, because if you can imagine going into an organization that wasn't doing well, if you said to a boastful, egotistical psychopath, do you think you could turn this company around? They would say, without any hesitation at all, they would say yes. A more thoughtful, humble leader would say, well, I think it's going to be a long, hard journey, but I think we can do it. So one of those sounds a lot more attractive than the other one. And so the long, hard journey isn't as attractive as the immediate turnaround, which is being promised by the psychopath.
Yeah.
And therefore we get confused again. And the best predictor of leadership effectiveness is previous leadership effectiveness. So you have to look at what they really did, not what they claim to have done, but what they really achieved in their last organization, and appoint them on that basis, no matter how awkward and neurotic they appear in the actual interview.
Yeah.
So give more weight to evidence than you do to appearance. Whereas at the moment we do it the other way around. We give far more weight to appearance.
Yeah, we do. And I mean, we live in a society where that is so much more valued. And generations are coming into the workplace where they have, where the external and the charm and visibility and likes and all of that is more valued than true tenaciousness, for example, or humility, like you talked about. So if we have a listener or listeners, and statistically we really do, that suspect that they are working within an environment or with a manager or an employee, for that matter, that are towards the organizational psychopathic perspective, what should they be aware of? What should I be aware of if that was me in my position?
Well, my advice would be, if you're dealing with that type of people, to be very careful. You are in various degrees of danger in your position, so don't confront them on your own. If you're ever going to talk to them in a way that might become threatening, make sure you've got somebody with you. So if you're going to accuse them of bullying, for example, which is fairly common, make sure you've got somebody with you in all meetings, so that they can't claim to have done things that they haven't really done, or they can't enact their abusiveness to its full force. If there's somebody else watching, they'll be a bit more circumspect about that. And most psychologists say, get out of there as quickly as you can, so try and avoid them. If possible, take your holidays when you know they'll be at work. Take longer lunch breaks. Just do anything you can to avoid their company, and which is what most people do in reality. And the numbers of people, it hasn't been, we haven't studied this quantitatively because it's a bit hard to do, but from the qualitative evidence we've looked at, the numbers of people who leave an organization are huge under a psychopathic leader. We're talking 80% of people leave over a 3-year period. And that's just not a one-off figure. That is time and time again, we've seen that same result. So everyone leaves as quickly as they possibly can, which in some cases isn't very quickly, depending on the availability of other jobs in your particular sector and how well the economy is going. But and again, coming back to the idea of red flags, if you appoint someone to lead a department or a section of your company, and then suddenly everybody starts to leave, then that is a serious red flag. The danger is that the psychopathic leader can talk themselves out of that situation by saying things like, "Oh, I run a tight ship. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen." No, they explain it away as them being proactive and discriminatory in the way they lead people. So they put pressure on people, they will say, and therefore some people leave. But that's just a smokescreen to what is really happening. So again, rely on the physical evidence. 70% of people have left, rather than relying on their plausible explanations about why those people have left. When you run a successful company and you're a good leader, nobody leaves. Everybody wants to stay there.
That's where I was coming to as well. Like, of course, if you're doing a transformation, a new type of organization might not suit everybody. But even if the case was that 50% of a company needs to be, it doesn't fit everybody. Like, you don't have any. You have a low count of unsatisfied leavers. And you have a low count of shocking leavers, because if you, as a company, decide, hey, we need to part ways because we're not a good match anymore, which happens, obviously, you have a plan for it. It's not it's not just like you're talking about that over a period of time, 70% of the company left. Oh, I don't care. But instead, you have a strategy of how to transform your company. And if you do it in a long-term strategy, then probably not that many people would need to be replaced.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the other thing that happens when you have such high staff turnover is there's nobody there with sufficient experience to train the newcomers who come in.
Exactly.
Because everyone's either left or in the process of leaving. And so the whole tacit knowledge of the organization starts to diminish, because the people with that knowledge are going elsewhere. And it's impossible to replace that, because it's built up over many, many years, and then it suddenly vanishes. So they leave.
So could you take it as far as saying that if you have a group or a company or that has a high turnover in staff, that there's probably some sort of toxic behavior behind the turnover?
Yeah, I'd say it's a very serious red flag to toxic leadership of some kind. But the trouble is, managers senior leaders don't keep an eye on that type of thing. They don't really. So what you have to do is say, so this is a list of people that we employed in this department in 2010, and this is a list of people we employed in this department in 2015, and there's almost nobody across the two lists. So objective evidence that something is seriously wrong. Nobody, senior leadership tends not to notice that that's happening.
So, how can I protect my organization against? You mentioned, background checks and stuff like that. But is there anything else I can do to truly protect my organization against organizational psychopathy?
Well, you could implement, psychometric testing at the recruitment stage and selection, and certainly at the promotion stage. So the higher you get in the organization, the more important it is not to have this type of people because of the power and control involved in those senior positions. So try and select them out at the recruitment stage. And there are two ways of doing that, I think. One is to use a measure of psychopathy to make sure you don't recruit them. And the other one would be to do the opposite and use a measure of caring leadership to recruit people. Because if you recruit people who care, then you automatically exclude people who don't care, by definition, which includes the psychopathic.
Yeah. And you're on to something very interesting. And I actually had a conversation about this the other day, where we so often focus on the sick and the toxic. And again, like in the school system, we focus on the bullying, or, instead of like looking at what are good traits, what are traits that we promote, what is good management within our company.
Well, they're both two sides of the same coin. So you can learn a great deal from toxic leadership, because I mean, a good example of this is from my own life and my own career. I found myself in the position of running a company when I was 27, mainly because the senior leadership team left and formed a competitive company. So I was left with what was left of the old company, and I was left as the leader, as the general manager, I think it was. So I said to myself, I've got no experience of leadership. What the hell am I going to do? How am I going to do this? So I had what turned out to be a good idea is I said to myself, I'll just do the opposite of all the bad leaders I've ever had. And of course, that worked like a dream. So within a year, we were one of the world's fastest growing market research companies. So just because I adopted that stance of doing the opposite of what a bad leader would do. And so that turns out to be what you should do as a good leader. So, and it's all about basics stuff. Talk to your people, care about people, train them, communicate with them, direct them, tell them what they need to do and how they need to do it, tell them what the aims are. So it's a lot to do with communication. So regular, frequent, personal communications about where we're going, where we are now, how we're going to get there. And that just motivates and encourages people to follow the path that you try to get on.
And also, I mean, if you also implement that as a high executive leader, which, I mean, good leadership is general throughout, it doesn't matter which level you function on, or you're functioning, you will also be able to spot the toxic leaderships, because you will, at least I know from my experience, if I am a manager over a manager, I'm interested in how their people feel. So a good leadership, and a safe and stable and successful in long-term leadership will have an interest in at least the second level beneath you if you're in a hierarchy organization.
Yeah, well, very much they should do that. That would aid them in their own effectiveness, yeah, by enabling them to choose the right people to succeed them, for example, or to work alongside them.
So how can you put this in a system? Like I'm interested in that, and I don't know if you have the answer, but we talk about people and we talk about like the doing the research and checking the backgrounds and stuff like that. But I also there has to be something fundamentally wrong with a system. For example, the banking industry that you mentioned that actively go after psychopathic behaviors because they want the profit to be that high that they're willing to sacrifice ethics. So how can we systematically start to bulletproof ourselves as a society against psychopathic behaviors? What is your advice?
Well, I think one way of doing that is the gap between an average employee's salary and the CEO's salary has just got wider and wider and wider over the last 30 or 40 years. So becoming a CEO of a major corporation is now like winning the lottery. All of a sudden, you're earning many millions of dollars or pounds per year.
Yeah.
And of course, that attracts the most ruthless people in society because that's exactly what they want. They want money, power, and control. And getting that sort of money is a major motivator for them. So one of the things I think we should do is drastically reduce the salaries that we pay CEOs and organizational leaders so that they're less attractive to psychopathic people.
Wow, I loved hearing that. Really, truly. And also to distribute those means in an organization because all roles are valuable in contributing to the success of the company in different ways, obviously.
The other thing is, as a society, we need to be a lot less in love with money than we currently are. And we give a sort of halo effect to billionaires and to the super rich, which they really don't deserve. Quite often they've gained money just because they happened to come across a clever idea that took off in a major way, in a way that's scalable, like online activities, for example, or internet activities. And it's largely, to some extent, accidental, the actual success that they've achieved. And yet they think it's because of their leadership abilities. So it goes to their head. And politicians in particular always seem to be in awe of the super rich. And therefore they let them get away with things that nobody else would let them get away with. I mean, you just have to think of Weinstein and Epstein and these people who have, because of their aura of power, have intimidated and the emerging case of Al Fayed in the UK. I don't know if you've read about that. In the boss of Harrods, he was abusing young women on an industrial scale, by the sound of it. So they're able to get away with it because of their apparatus of power that they set around themselves, and also because of the awe in which we have held them.
So a power shift in society is needed, and a different focus on what we value as a system. I mean, it's not an easy task, obviously.
Yeah, we should value those who value others and not value those who value money.
I couldn't agree more. Time flies. We're almost out of time. It's so interesting, and we could dive into this topic so much more. Is there anything that I haven't asked about or that we haven't addressed or talked about that you would like to tell our listeners or talk to the people that are listening?
No, I don't think so. Not off the top of my head, but as soon as you end the interview, I'll probably think of something.
Exactly. Um, I mean, there's so much that I take with me from this, from our conversation today. The two main characteristic or telltales with the charming and intelligent, the also the poised and the calm, which is, you know, the lack of empathy, um, shining through. Also, that there are different positions and roles in our society that are more exposed to these behaviors. You talked about HR managers and auditors and so on. And that also gives me a reflection of like what we need to do in order to help them, and help these roles that are exposed and that have to deal with this a lot more. Um, Speaking from experience, obviously my own previous experience, but also give tools and do what you do and spread your knowledge so much more. Um,
Yeah,
Also,
generating awareness of the problem is quite important, I think, because people, it's usually brand new to people, and they're not expecting it, and they don't know how to deal with it when they come across it. You know, psychopathy in their
yeah.
line manager or their leader.
Mm,
And you mentioned politicians, which we haven't really talked about, but they're evident right through history, from Ivan the Terrible through to Muammar Gaddafi,
yeah.
as highly psychopathic. And personally, I think um, we should screen for psychopathy for anybody who wants a senior political position. So
Yeah.
I wrote to Mark Carney the other day, the Prime Minister of Canada. I thought he'd be open to such a suggestion. I suggested that they implement the law in Canada that nobody can become Prime Minister without screening for psychopathy.
Mm.
He hasn't answered yet, so it was the communication was probably diverted by one of his minions. I probably thought it was some kind of crackpot who was suggesting this.
I sign under for that as well. And like you said, people that care about people should be in positions where that lead both society and organizations. Um, is Dr. Clive Buddy, it's been such a pleasure to once again talk to you, and I truly, truly hope it's not for the last time, but that we continue our dialogue forward. And if you, as a listener, want to know more about the work and the research, where do they find uh, your
Well,
work?
there's an academic search engine called Google Scholar.
Hmm.
If you use that and just put in the words corporate psychopaths, you'll find loads of my material, basically, or loads of material
Mm.
on corporate psychopaths. It tends not to be in psychology journals because they look at psychopaths from an individual point of view. So, are they happy? Are they resilient? How does their mind work?
Mm.
Whereas I'm one of the few who look at it from a wider societal point of view and say, what effect do they have on the rest of us and on
Yeah,
organizations and on society?
yeah, yeah. Very, very, it's so interesting. I can highly recommend reading your research. Thank you so much for your.
There's also that book behind me, it's a book called
Oh, corporate.
A Climate of Fear, Stone called Psychopaths at Work, which is available from Amazon. The academic version is a bit too expensive for most people, so don't bother with that one.
Read the other version instead. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Buddy, for this time together. I highly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, nice to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.